Welcome to the 90s. Plug in your modem, put fresh batteries in your Walkman, get hyped over the Star Wars prequels, and play some Crash Bandicoot. Wait a second. The 90s were 20 years ago. Most internet is done wirelessly, physical music is dead, the prequels sucked, and Crash Bandicoot is back. This feels like the plot to a Twilight Zone episode, only without an allegory. Due to siding with Nintendo in the days where I could only afford one home console per generation, I never actually owned a PS1, which meant I would always make the most of visits to friends who did own one, and I have good memories of playing stuff like Tekken, Spyro, and obviously Crash Bandicoot. This furry orange tote was a legit big deal back then, and even had a brief window of time where he was considered the system's mascot all but officially. Original developer Naughty Dog jumping ship led to a steady decline in relevance and quality for the series, and its last proper entry was almost a decade ago.
If I get this Doominator eye working, we'll have the best entertainment system of all time!
And you can see why. Naughty Dog fared better, going on to create the Jak, Uncharted, and Last of Us series over time. Outside of a playable nod to their origins in Uncharted 4, they've stated they aren't interested in returning to simplistic platformers of Crash's ilk anytime soon. And maybe that's for the best. Can you imagine what a modern Naughty Dog Crash would be like?
Don't do this to me, baby. Don't do this to me, baby.
But after such an extended hiatus, Activision, who's owned the rights to Crash for some time now, is possibly testing the waters to gauge interest in the series again, with rather than a new entry, a greatly touched up re-release of the original PS1 trilogy in the form of Crash Bandicoot, the Sane Trilogy. It's spearheaded by developer Vicarious Visions, who were responsible for some GBA spin-offs and a kart racer back in the post-Naughty Dog days. They've made it clear that despite graphics and sound being redone from scratch to meet modern standards, the gameplay and levels have remained untouched, making this a real time capsule of a game despite having a shiny coat of paint. The only question now is, how well does the trilogy fare with today's standards? First off, personal opinion, but I don't know why the developers are refusing to use the term remake for this compilation. Yes, gameplay and level layouts are identical outside of Coco being playable, and some additions like auto-saving for the sake of convenience, but like I said, the graphics and audio have been completely redone to fit modern standards. If you tell me a game's getting remastered, I envision stuff like the boatload of PS2 ports we got on the PS3, a straightforward upscaling and widescreen support being all there is to it. But beyond just that, it really doesn't give the effort put into Sane its due credit. It's one of the nicest looking games of its kind around. The original Crash games were certainly high on personality, but light on plot outside of cutscenes to bookend each game, and this hasn't been changed in the slightest. The actual shots and dialogue seem to be lifted verbatim from the originals. I guess you could argue that adding additional story elements could bog the game's flow down a bit, but I always value plot as part of the impetus to keep playing in any sort of game that offers it, and platformers are no exception to me, despite many of the best series in the genre mostly avoiding this approach. The upside to there still being so few cutscenes is that not just their graphics, but the actual animation on them is legit phenomenal. Fluid, detailed motions, super expressive characters, swash and stretch. It's practically straight out of feature film, and I love every second of it. This is no Wrath of Cortex in the production value department. Props to whoever animated the Beyond Nutty embryo conversations in particular. The core mechanics are basically the same across all three games. Jumping and spinning across enemies and crates, navigating from point A to B, and snagging hard to miss and oddly shaped crystals in 2 and 3, as well as returning to levels hoping to get gems for destroying every crate, or going for one life speedruns in time trial modes. These optional objectives fall under the often maddening, but also often satisfying classification that game completionists are familiar with. It can be super frustrating to reach the end of a level but still have 1 or 2 crates unaccounted for, but at least the game won't give you as harsh a reminder as when you miss dozens of them.
He's already dead!
But since the gameplay hasn't been modernized, that's the main area where the games, I want to say show their age, but that sounds like a slam on what are still very enjoyable platformers. First, you definitely get the feeling that many parts of each game were designed with non-DualShock owners in mind. Yes, there was a brief period for PlayStation owners without analog sticks, and it's as retrospectively awkward as it sounds. I'm not even referring to the series' penchant for narrow, tunnel-like level design, or the numerous side-scrolling segments that make up bonus areas and many parts of regular levels, but many sections have an almost grid-like feel to their layout and physical geometry, especially in Crash 1. Thankfully, 2 and Warp do a better job of using more intricate visuals and layouts to mask or even eliminate this issue. Crash only having 2 preset speeds for walking and running even with analogs feels like a missed opportunity, though at least I can still have him crawl and let out his inner Duran. Crash 2 and 3 also do a generally good job of mixing up mechanics, by adding recurring level types that play quite differently, like underwater swims or vehicles with different gimmicks. Levels across all 3 games also often use animal riding themes, like a pig, polar bear, or tiger, and they're basically auto-runners, making for both tightly scripted and challenging fun and frustration in equal measures. What's important here is that I got the crystal. That's all that matters. For all the polish Sane Trilogy contains, its design isn't without issues. Not just in the level design, where I feel the sometimes wonky perspective results in feeling like I was making leaps of partial faith, but in some cases, its detection felt wonky sometimes. I swear the lines in the third game's first boss are magnetized to me. On the other hand, I'll take it. Funny enough, I'd also say it's the boss battles where the trilogy tends to show its age the most. Sure, there's some standouts, like both fights with Engine and the clever setup with Dinkodile's fight, but others like Papu Papu, Pinstripe, and especially the Komodo brothers just come off as the most basic and brief of encounters. Bosses have become capable of a lot more creativity in the decade since the PS1, and I really wouldn't have minded some of these being reworked, along with the motorcycle and jet ski controls in Warped, which still feel too stiff and too loose respectively. I swear, getting the crystal in the second bike race took me a good 40 minutes. Thankfully, outside of these admittedly large complaints, the games still generally do a good job of showing why they were so highly regarded. Levels are often good at having unique gimmicks, even outside the animal and vehicle portions. Plowing through all 3 games just to reach the final bosses will net you a solid dozen hours of gameplay for $40, and going back for gems, relics, and trophies extends the collection's longevity even further. Hunting down and smashing all those crates is still one of gaming's greatest little pleasures to me. The Sane Trilogy thankfully feels like less of a cash-in on nostalgia, and more of a genuine effort to give Crash's golden years a stylish makeover for modern audiences. I had a really good time revisiting these games, and with most of the issues I did have stemming from their original content, I can only hope that the game sells okay enough for Activision to consider a new, modern, but traditional Crash